Hey everybody, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah, welcome back.
Today we're going to be talking about, we're going to be diving into the topic of narcissistic wives.
Ooh, interesting.
And we're going to be looking at this YouTube video by Coach Liliya Labonte.
Okay.
And she's a relationship coach who describes herself as a survivor of narcissistic abuse.
Okay, yeah.
And in this video, she sort of outlines 10 ways that a narcissistic wife might treat her husband.
Right.
So we're going to go through those and see what she has to say.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. I'm really interested to see what she thinks.
Yeah, and, this is just one person's perspective. We're not trying to say that every relationship is like this.
Of course not.
Or that every narcissistic wife acts in these ways, but we're just trying to present the information that's in this video.
Yeah, just to explore these ideas and see, what we can learn from them.
Exactly, and see if it resonates with anyone or if it sparks any thoughts.
For sure.
So yeah, why don't we just go ahead and dive right in?
Let's do it.
So her first point is about this idea of feeling like you're always the problem.
Okay.
And she talks about how a narcissistic wife might constantly make her husband feel inadequate.
Right.
He's responsible for everything that goes wrong in the relationship.
Okay.
And I'm curious, from your perspective, as a therapist, does that resonate with what you've seen in your work at all?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's not always the wife, but
right.
You definitely see this pattern in couples where one partner is sort of constantly blaming the other partner.
Yeah.
And, making them feel like they're never good enough.
Right.
Like they can never do anything right.
And so this is coming from a place of narcissism, would you say?
I mean, it can be a sign of narcissism, right? Narcissists often have this need to be perfect, to see themselves as superior.
Right.
And so in order to maintain that image, they have to put other people down.
Right.
And make them feel inferior.
Yeah, so it's almost like they're projecting their own insecurities onto their partner.
Yeah.
And Labonte gives some pretty vivid examples of this. She talks about criticizing everything,
Like what?
Like how you load the dishwasher to the clothes you buy.
Oh, gosh.
Never giving you any positive reinforcement.
Okay.
It's just like this constant stream of negativity.
Right.
And I imagine that can be really damaging over time.
Oh, absolutely. It wears you down. It makes you start to doubt yourself.
Yeah.
Your decisions, your abilities.
Yeah, like you're constantly walking on eggshells.
Right. Like you can never do anything. Right.
And do you think this is intentional or is it more of an unconscious thing?
I think it could be both. You know?
Well,
sometimes it's definitely a deliberate manipulation tactic.
Okay.
But other times I think it's just sort of how they operate.
Right.
Like it's just this ingrained pattern of behavior.
And it can be really hard to break out of that.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
And so it can be really hard to be on the receiving end of that, too.
Oh.
So it's almost like they need to create this imbalance of power.
Right.
Like this queen-servant dynamic that Labonte talks about later on in the video.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
We'll get to that. But yeah, I mean, for now, let's move on to her second point, which is this idea that the narcissistic wife is never truly on your side, never a real partner.
Interesting.
And that kind of brings up this issue of trust and insecurity in relationships.
Right.
Especially those where narcissism is involved.
Yeah.
And I know that you talk a lot about attachment theory in your work.
Yeah.
Could you maybe explain a little bit about how that might play into this?
Sure. So attachment theory basically says that our early childhood experiences really shape how we relate to others in adulthood.
Okay.
So if we had caregivers who were consistently responsive and attuned to our needs, we develop what's called a secure attachment style, which means that we're comfortable with intimacy and we can trust others.
Makes sense.
But if our caregivers were neglectful or inconsistent, we might develop an insecure attachment style.
Yeah.
Which can make it harder for us to trust and to feel secure in relationships.
So someone with a narcissistic personality would be more likely to have an insecure attachment style?
Possibly, yeah.
Okay.
It's not always the case, but it's definitely a common pattern.
And so that could explain why they might have difficulty being a true partner?
Exactly, yeah.
Like they might be constantly testing their partner or trying to control them.
Right.
Because they don't really trust that they'll be there for them.
Yeah, they might be afraid of getting hurt or abandoned.
Right.
So they try to protect themselves by keeping their partner at a distance.
And so Labonte uses this phrase, taking away your manhood.
Oh, wow.
Which is a pretty strong phrase.
Yeah.
But I think it really highlights the power dynamics
Definitely.
that can be at play in these relationships.
It's about control.
Yeah.
It's about making the other person feel small and powerless.
Like they're not good enough.
Exactly.
And that can be really damaging to someone's self-esteem.
Absolutely.
It's almost like they're trying to break you down.
Yeah, it's like they're trying to chip away at your confidence.
Yeah, until you're completely dependent on them.
Right, and that's how they maintain their control.
Yeah, and that's a really good segue into her third point, which is about the withholding of affection.
Okay.
So she talks about how a narcissistic wife might use intimacy as a weapon, making her husband feel guilty for even wanting it.
Right.
And I know that this can be a really sensitive topic.
Yeah.
But it's something that I think is important to talk about.
Definitely.
Because it can be a form of abuse.
Absolutely.
So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah. So, intimacy is supposed to be something that's shared.
Right.
It's supposed to be something that's pleasurable and fulfilling for both partners.
Yeah.
But when it's used as a weapon, they can become a form of control and manipulation.
And Labonte even mentions specific phrases that a narcissistic wife might use.
Like what?
Not again or not right now, which just adds to that feeling of rejection.
Yeah, it makes you feel unwanted and undesired.
And inadequate.
Exactly.
Like you're not good enough.
And it can really damage your self-esteem.
Absolutely.
It can make you start to question your worthiness.
Yeah.
Your attractiveness.
Right.
Your desirability.
And it can make you feel really lonely, even if you're in a relationship.
Definitely.
So it's not just about the physical act of intimacy.
Right.
It's about the emotional connection that's being withheld.
And that can be really devastating.
And unfortunately, it often doesn't stop there.
Right.
Labonte's next point focuses on isolation.
Okay.
How a narcissistic wife might try to isolate her husband from his friends and family.
Yeah, that's a classic sign of abuse.
All right.
It's about controlling the victim's access to support.
Yeah.
So they become more dependent on the abuser.
And she gives this really interesting example of the narcissistic wife suggesting a friend that the husband would never want to hang out with.
Interesting.
It's like this subtle way of creating the illusion of choice.
Yeah.
Like, oh, see, I'm not stopping you from seeing your friends. I'm even encouraging it.
But it's on their terms.
But it's all a facade. And it's still a form of control.
Exactly.
And that brings us to Labonte's fifth point, which she calls the I could have done better fantasy.
Oh, wow.
And this is where the narcissist's need for superiority really comes into play. So they're constantly belittling their partner, comparing him to other men, fantasizing about someone better.
Right.
And it's all about feeding their own ego and reinforcing their sense of control.
And it's so damaging for the partner.
Yeah.
It's like this constant drip, drip, drip of negativity.
Yeah. And she uses this phrase here, it's going to chip away from you so much.
Wow.
And I think that really captures that slow, insidious erosion of self-worth.
Yeah.
That can happen over time.
It's like death by 1,000 cuts.
Exactly.
It's subtle, but it's deadly.
And it can be really hard to recognize when it's happening.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because it's so gradual.
And it's often disguised as love.
Yeah.
Or concern.
Right.
They might say things like, oh, I'm just trying to help you be your best self.
Right.
But it's really about controlling you and keeping you down.
And that's just so insidious.
It is, yeah.
And so moving on to her sixth point.
Okay.
We delve into a pretty heavy topic.
Okay.
Which is blaming the husband for past trauma.
Oh, wow.
So she talks about how a narcissistic wife might project her own past hurts onto her current relationship.
Oh, yeah.
And this is a complex issue because obviously, projecting past trauma can be a defense mechanism.
Sure.
It's a way of coping with unresolved pain. But in the context of a narcissistic relationship, it can be really damaging.
Yeah, it's often used to manipulate and control the partner.
Right.
It's a way of making them feel responsible for the narcissist's pain.
Yeah, and Labonte gives this really shocking example of a narcissistic wife running up credit card debt as revenge for perceived past wrongs.
Wow, that's intense.
Yeah, and it just shows how this type of projection can manifest in these really harmful ways. It's not just about words, it can have these real-world consequences.
Absolutely.
And speaking of real-world consequences, Labonte's seventh point delves even further into the power imbalance that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
She describes it as a queen-servant dynamic.
Oh, wow.
Where the husband is essentially treated as a provider with no autonomy.
Okay.
And so I think that lack of autonomy is a really key indicator of an unhealthy power dynamic.
Absolutely.
And, financial control
is a really common tactic that's used in abusive relationships.
It's about taking away the partner's independence. Making them completely reliant on the abuser.
So if you're in a relationship where you have to report every purchase, get grilled about every dollar you spend, that's a big red flag.
Huge red flag.
And it's just not healthy.
No, it's not.
You know, healthy relationships are built on trust and respect.
Exactly.
Not control and interrogation.
Yeah.
And that's such a good point.
Thanks.
And it actually ties in really well with Labonte's 8th point.
Okay.
Which focuses on the narcissistic wife's expertise in blame shifting.
Oh, the blame shifting.
Yeah, it's uncanny.
It's like their superpower.
Right.
They can twist any situation to make themselves the victim.
Even when they're clearly at fault.
Even when they're the ones who started it.
Yeah. Have you ever experienced this?
Oh, yeah.
Where someone just manages to turn the tables?
All the time. And make you feel responsible for their own actions.
Yeah, it's crazy making.
It is.
It makes you start to question your own reality.
Yeah, it's like being gaslighted.
Exactly.
You know, you start to think, maybe I am the problem. Maybe I am crazy.
And that's exactly what they want.
Exactly.
They want you to doubt yourself.
Yeah.
So they can maintain control.
And avoid accountability.
Exactly.
So it's like a defense mechanism.
Yeah, it's a way of protecting their fragile ego.
Right.
You know, they can't handle the thought of being wrong.
Or imperfect.
So they have to project that onto someone else.
And it's just so exhausting.
It is, yeah.
To be on the receiving end of that.
It's draining.
So moving on to Labonte's 9th point.
Okay.
She talks about this idea of emotional absence.
Okay.
And she describes it as talking to a person with no soul.
Wow.
Which is a pretty chilling image.
Yeah, it is.
And I imagine it feels incredibly lonely.
Oh, absolutely.
And isolating.
Yeah, it's like you're living with a ghost. Someone who's physically present, but emotionally unavailable.
And so what do you think causes this?
I mean, there are a lot of factors that can contribute.
Okay.
But I think one of the biggest ones is childhood trauma.
Okay.
You know, if someone grows up in an environment where their emotions are invalidated or punished, they might learn to shut down emotionally.
Okay.
It's a way of protecting themselves.
And so they carry that into their adult relationships.
Exactly.
And it makes it really difficult to form genuine connections.
It's like they're afraid to let anyone in.
Yeah, because they've been hurt before.
Exactly.
And they don't want to get hurt again.
Right.
So they keep everyone at arm's length.
And unfortunately, that just perpetuates the cycle.
Yeah.
Because the more they isolate themselves, the lonelier they become.
And the harder it is to break out of that pattern.
Exactly.
And sadly, Labonte's final point is no less unsettling.
Okay.
It focuses on the constant threat of leaving. So she talks about how a narcissistic wife might use this as a way to control her husband.
Yeah.
Keeping him in a state of fear and uncertainty.
Well,
and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic manipulation tactic.
Right.
You know, it's all about creating this sense of instability.
Yeah.
So the victim is constantly walking on eggshells.
Trying to please the narcissist.
Right.
Afraid of doing something wrong.
Yeah, afraid of triggering their departure.
And it's just so exhausting.
Oh, absolutely.
To live like that.
It's emotionally draining.
And it can be really hard to break free.
Yeah, because the narcissist will often use intermittent reinforcement.
What does that mean?
So it's like they'll give you just enough crumbs of affection to keep you hoping that things will get better.
Yeah.
But then they'll go right back to their abusive behavior.
So it's like this cycle.
It's exactly
full of hope and despair.
Yeah, and it can be really hard to break out of.
And it can be really hard to recognize when you're in it.
Because you're so focused on those crumbs of affection.
Yeah.
You're so desperate for that love and validation.
That you're willing to put up with anything.
And that's what the narcissist is counting on.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to talk about these things. Raise awareness, because the more we understand about narcissistic abuse, the better equipped we'll be to identify it and to protect ourselves from it.
Exactly, and to help others who are experiencing it.
Absolutely.
You know, we need to break the silence.
Yeah.
And let people know that they're not alone.
And that there is help available.
Exactly. It's, you know, important to remember that this is just one perspective.
Right. This is just one person's experience.
Yeah, we're talking about Coach Labonte's video.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's important not to generalize.
Right.
You know, narcissism is a complex thing.
Yeah, and every relationship is different.
Every situation is unique.
You know, even though this video is focused on narcissistic wives,
right?
I think it's important to acknowledge that men can be narcissistic too.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, this isn't just a female thing.
Yeah, abuse can happen in any relationship.
And it's never okay.
Never.
And so if anything we've discussed so far has resonated with you, if you're seeing yourself in these patterns, please know that you're not alone.
You're not alone.
And there is help available.
Absolutely.
You know, therapy can be a really great resource.
Yeah, it can be so helpful.
Have that outside perspective.
To have someone to talk to.
Someone who can help you understand what's going on.
And help you develop coping mechanisms.
And can make decisions about your relationship.
Exactly.
And so, you know, if you're feeling stuck or if you're just not sure what to do, please reach out to a therapist.
I can help.
You know, there's no shame in asking for help.
None at all.
And, you know, something that really struck me in Labonte's video was her point about how damaging it can be when the narcissistic wife is also a mother.
Oh, yeah, that's a really important point.
You know, she talks about the impact this can have on children.
It can be devastating.
You know, and I think that's something that we don't talk about enough.
Yeah, it's often overlooked.
You know, because we tend to focus on the relationship between the adults.
Right.
But children are so vulnerable.
Yeah, they absorb everything.
They're so impressionable.
And they don't have the same ability to understand.
Right.
Or to cope.
And so they can be really deeply affected.
By these unhealthy dynamics.
Yeah.
You know, they might start to believe that this is normal.
Right.
That this is how relationships are supposed to be.
And that can have lasting consequences.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, it can affect their own relationship.
Their self-esteem.
Their mental health.
Their whole lives.
And so it's just so important to be aware of this.
To protect children.
And to break the cycle of abuse.
Exactly.
And so, you know, I'm curious from your perspective.
What are some of the things that we can do to break that cycle?
I think it starts with education.
Okay.
You know, we need to teach people about healthy relationships.
Yeah.
About boundaries. About consent.
And about the signs of abuse.
Exactly.
So that they can recognize it.
Yeah, and get help if they need it.
And so this education needs to start early.
As early as possible.
Yeah.
You know, in schools.
In families.
In communities.
Yeah.
We need to be having these conversations.
Openly and honestly. Without shame.
And, you know, we also need to challenge
Yeah.
those societal norms and expectations that contribute to these unhealthy dynamics.
Like what?
Well, like the idea that men should always be strong and stoic.
Right.
And that women should be submissive and nurturing.
Yeah, those gender roles can be so damaging.
They can create this imbalance of power.
And they can make it harder for people to speak up.
When they're being abused. You know, because they might feel like they're not supposed to.
Right.
Or that they'll be judged or blamed. And so we need to create a culture where it's safe for people to come forward.
A culture of support and empathy.
Exactly.
Where people feel believed and validated.
And where they can get the help that they need.
To heal and to move on.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, you know, even for people who aren't personally affected by this, we can all do our part.
Absolutely.
To challenge these harmful stereotypes.
Yeah.
And to create a more supportive environment.
For everyone.
Exactly.
You know, it's about recognizing that abuse can take many forms.
Right.
And that it's never the victim's fault.
Never.
It's about believing survivors and offering compassion and understanding.
And support.
Yeah.
You know, whatever that looks like for them.
Exactly.
You know, sometimes it's just listening.
Yeah, just being there.
Just being present.
Yeah.
And letting them know that they're not alone.
Yeah. And that they're loved.
And that they're worthy of love and respect.
Well said.
Thank you.
Wow, this has been quite a deep dive.
It has.
Intense, but really eye-opening.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, Coach Labonte's video definitely gave us a lot to think about.
A lot to unpack.
And for our listeners, you know, we hope this conversation has sparked some reflection, maybe even some uncomfortable truths.
Yeah.
But remember, awareness is always the first step.
Absolutely.
Towards healing and building healthier relationships.
And creating a better world for everyone.
Well said.
Thank you.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive.
Sounds good.
Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And until next time.
Yeah.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
Take care, everyone.